afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to the lecture series on communicative English, and the topic that we're going to take up today is oral presentation. For the sake of convenience, I'll be dividing this entire interactive session into certain sections. I'll be starting with the basic definition of an oral presentation, and then I'll shift on to the various stages that are involved in making a good oral presentation. So let's start with the definition first of all. One of the very simple definitions of oral presentation, it states that it is a presentation in which an idea is presented orally. It is a participative two-way communication, and it aims to bring about a desired change in the understanding or opinion of people on the topic at hand. So let's discuss these sections one by one. It is a presentation in which an idea is presented orally. So the oral part is pretty clear that we speak, we express ourselves, and we share the ideas on the topic at hand. Now, some of the people say that in an oral presentation, it is necessity that every time we need to share a new idea. I personally do not agree with this. Reason being that it is not practically possible to discuss a new idea every single time we give a presentation. I can give you an example for this. Let us suppose I decide to give an oral presentation on the topic like corruption in India. Now, it's not humanly possible for me to give or share a new idea every single time I speak. So if at all my topic is related to my own genuine research, then maybe I can do it. I can share new ideas with which other people might not be familiar. But in the absence of genuine research, which will be the case in a majority of the occasions, I will be using ideas that already exist. My arrangement of the ideas, my treatment of the ideas, the total number of examples that I give to explain the idea, that can be different, and that will bring the novelty part to the entire presentation. The second part of the definition stated that it is a participative two-way communication. How is it a participative communication? If I'm giving a presentation, I'm the sender, and people sitting in the audience, they are the receivers. So I'm one party, and all the people in the audience, they are the second party. So both the parties are always involved because I send the message, and my receivers, my listeners, they receive the message, they decode the message, and then they understand the meaning. Next up, it's a two-way communication. How? If the people in the audience, they give positive or negative feedback, two-way communication channel is established. I'm the sender, I send a message, they decode the message, and then they give a feedback. But what if the receivers decide not to give any feedback? So kindly remember one line here, that no feedback is also feedback. So if I'm giving a presentation and my students or people in the audience, they are totally blank, no verbal feedback, no non-verbal feedback, still I get a feedback that they are not interested in listening to me. Maybe they're very tired, maybe the topic is way above their level. So all these things might be there. So two-way channel is always established whenever we talk about oral presentation. Next up, the aims of oral presentation. An oral presentation aims to bring about a change in the understanding or opinion of people on the subject at hand. So the normal example that I give, the common example that I give in the class is that of a chain reaction. Let us assume that you all do not know anything about chain reaction, and I am an expert in the field. So I can give a presentation to improve your understanding of the subject. Now it is hoped that your understanding will improve, but there's no guarantee that it will surely happen. Now there can be multiple reasons why this understanding might not improve. The understanding might not improve because of the reasons which are there at the sender's end. For instance, my knowledge of the subject matter might not be that good. My hold over language might not be that good. I might be extremely tired, so I might not be able to explain things well. There might be a disturbance in the form of a competing stimulus, so the receivers might not be able to understand a thing. Or many more such reasons. Likewise, there can be problems at the end of the receivers also. As a receiver, my people in the audience or my audience, it might be very tired. People might be very bored. People might be sitting in very uncomfortable environmental conditions, maybe in an excessive heat wave conditions, or some of them might not be very well, so they might not listen to me, so their understanding might not improve. So it is hoped and aimed that understanding will improve, but there's no guarantee of it. Likewise, the other aim of an oral presentation to bring about a change in the opinion of people. Now, I can give you an example. Let us suppose I decide to give a presentation on euthanasia, that is mercy killing, and then let us assume that you all who are listening to me, sitting at home, you believe that euthanasia should not be there. Mercy killing should not be there. But I believe that euthanasia should be there, especially in a country like India, where it's tough to provide even hospital beds to patients. So I can try to bring about a change in your opinion, but there's no guarantee that this will happen. Right? Discuss now the basic definition of an oral presentation. Now we shift on to the next stage. In the next stage, we are going to talk about the various sections that are there, or the various stages that are there in making a good presentation. So basically there are three broad stages. The first one is the planning stage. You need to plan for everything if you want to deliver. So the first one is planning, the second stage is preparation, and the third stage is presentation. So I'll be talking about these three stages one by one. So let's start with the first one, that is planning stage. So in the planning stage, one of the most important things, it is audience analysis. Before we start talking about any kind of presentation that we have to give, we need to know the type of audience that we are going to address. Now it's very easy to say type of audience. Now this one word type is very broad. So we can have different markers in it. For instance, the first thing about audience should be the number. We should know the total number of people that we have to address. Now you might ask the question that why is it so? I can explain it with an example. Let us suppose I have to address, or I have to give a presentation to an audience of 10 people. And in comparison to it, I have to give a presentation in front of say 1,000 people. So when I give presentation in front of 10 people, chances are that one-to-one interaction with people will be more. Chances are that I can give them personal attention. Chances are that I can allow them to speak, and the interaction can be, the presentation can be very interactive. But on the other hand, if I have to address 1,000 people, I possibly cannot interact with the people in my presentation. If I allow people to give response to my questions, I'll not be in control of my presentation. So does this mean that if the number of people is more, then I might not ask questions from them in the presentation? Certainly not. Questions can be asked, but I do not allow the people to give answers. I give them a separate slot towards the end of the presentation where they might give a feedback or ask questions, but I won't allow it in the middle of the presentation. So this means number of people decide the way I'm going to interact with the people. Next up, I should be very clear about the academic background of people, because if I do not know the academic background of people, I might create a big mess when I compile the matter. Again, an example. Let us suppose that I have to give a presentation on English tragedy. And now I'm going to address a gathering of engineers. Now engineers, because of their academic background, they do not know that Aristotle was the first person who studied Greek tragedies and wrote Poetics. Poetics is a book which talks about how a good tragedy should be written. So if I address a gathering of engineers, I might start with the current or the modern concept of tragedy which was given by Arthur Miller. Since they do not have that academic background, no one expects me to talk about Aristotle. What will happen if I start with Aristotle in front of engineers? Pretty soon they'll be bored, they'll be fed up of what all I'll discuss. But now let's just change the example a bit, or to be more specific, let's change the audience in the example. Instead of engineers now, if I address a gathering of people who are from the background of literature and I start with Arthur Miller, my presentation is going to be a big disaster. Why? Because their academic background tells them that Aristotle was the first one who talked about tragedies and poetics. So they expect that any speaker will start from the basic stuff, and that is Aristotle, and then move towards Arthur Miller or Arthur Miller's modern concept of tragedy. So academic background of people is extremely important. After doing this small little, or after doing this audience analysis briefly, the next important thing in planning stage is to know about the venue and to prepare for it. Now, many times this is not an option, but if at all this option is there, try to visit the venue before you give the presentation. There will be sound system there, so kindly try to use a mic beforehand, because in a very big room with a mic system, your voice might echo, and that echo can put you off in a proper presentation. So kindly try to visit the place and try to practice. Even in the planning stage, the next important thing, keep in mind the time limit. Now, time limit becomes extremely important, because if you keep in mind the total time that you have, then only you'll be able to compile the matter properly. This very important question, whether you have to go in detail with the presentation or not, is dependent upon the time factor. If I have 2 minutes at my disposal, I'll certainly not go into the details. But if I have 20 minutes, I'll compile the matter accordingly. The last important point in planning stage is the objective. Now, we should be clear about the objective of the presentation, because depending upon the objective, my content and my style will change. Now, let us suppose that I'm going to give this oral presentation, or simply a presentation to sell a refrigerator. Now, I'm a salesman giving a presentation to sell a refrigerator. Now, what will be the content of my presentation? The content of my presentation will deal with the features of refrigerator, the guarantees that come along with the refrigerator, the accountability that is there with the brand name. I'll talk about all those things, and I'll try to establish a link between the features of the product, the refrigerator, and need of the buyer. So this will be the content part. But my style, it will become persuasive. Try to persuade the person to buy the product that I'm selling. Now let's change the objective. Now, instead of selling a refrigerator, if my objective is to motivate you all to give your best or to be passionate in life, content will drastically change. I might give real life examples. I might talk about the situations wherein people gave their best and achieved a lot. I might talk about the situations wherein odds were heavily against people, still they persevered and they succeeded. I might quote from literature to motivate you. I was ever a fighter, so one fight more, the best and the last. I hope you're motivated enough. Or I can quote from books, self-help books maybe. It is about being blind since birth and yet having the conviction that you can make it and become a Stevie Wonder. It is about being deaf and still composing some of the best and profoundest music ever, like Beethoven. It is about not only being blind and deaf, but also being dumb and becoming a Helen Keller. It is about being kicked out of school and then becoming world's leading business tycoon, like Bill Gates. So the important thing, content will drastically change, keeping in mind the objective. More examples will be there in the content if my objective is to motivate you. And of course, my style of speaking will change accordingly. I'll try to convince you that even if stacks are against you, odds are stacked heavily against you, then you're not supposed to give up. You are supposed to persevere, and hopefully you'll succeed in life. The second stage in an oral presentation, that is the preparation stage. Now, in preparation stage, basically we deal with three things, that is introduction, main body, and conclusion. Now, there are various ways in which we can write the introduction, various patterns in which the main body can be structured, and then certain practices that should be kept in mind when we talk about the conclusion. So I'll not go into the details, but we'll talk about things very briefly. At the first year level, if at all you're not well versed in public speaking, then just keep one thing in mind, that when you prepare the content of this oral presentation, it should have a decent introduction, good enough main body with supporting main ideas and supporting ideas, and a conclusion. If at all you're well versed or you have been doing public speaking, then I'll talk about some of the strategies briefly. If at all you have to introduce the oral presentation, the introduction part, the basic aim is to attract the attention of the people. How can you attract the attention of the people? You can do it by asking questions. That's one strategy. Let's assume that I'm going to speak on the topic India as a nation today, and I can start by asking a question or a series of questions. Don't you believe that politicians and bureaucrats have ruined the country? Don't you believe that only technocrats can save it? Now, what will happen when I ask the question? The moment I ask a question, the people sitting in front of me, they naturally try to think of the answer, and they become involved in the entire process. So this is one of the aims, right? The other thing can be, I can give a startling statement. So what is the meaning of a startling statement? Anything that people in the audience, they don't expect, and I say it. We keep the same topic, the same lines, but instead of questions, let's change them to statements. So instead of saying, don't you believe politicians and bureaucrats have ruined the country? I can simply say, politicians and bureaucrats have ruined the country, only technocrats can save it. So this is not something that people expect straight away in a presentation. So they'll naturally listen to me, and they'll try to find out what I have to say, or how do I believe that technocrats can save the country. Next up, the main body. Now, there are various patterns on which the matter can be structured. I can talk about one or two of them. One of the most common types of pattern is the chronological pattern. Now, in chronological pattern, what happens is that we arrange things according to the time, right? So let us suppose that I have to talk about three things. Now, I talk about these three things according to the time sequence in which these things occurred. So let's have an example. Let us suppose I talk about, first of all, economic depression, the Great Economic Depression. We change this example a bit. Now, instead of two things, we talk about three things. Let us suppose I want to refer to the First World War, the Great Economic Depression, and the Second World War. So I keep the order same in my presentation. I don't start with the Great Economic Depression, then the First World War, and then the Second World War. Reason being, First World War was there from 1914 to 18. The Great Economic Depression, the second thing in the main body, that was from 1929 to 33, and then the Second World War, 39 to 45. So talked about three things in the order in which they occurred. So this is the chronological pattern for you. Now we shift to the conclusion part. So in the conclusion, you should try to summarize the basic thing. The carry home message should be there in the conclusion. Many times people just talk about the things that they've already discussed, and the conclusion becomes very boring. Kindly remember that most likely it is the conclusion when majority of the people will be listening to you. So you need to give them a carry home message, the most important message. Of course, you have to summarize your basic argument in the conclusion. So do give signposts like firstly, secondly, these sort of words, so that people should be very clear about the fact that you've made 4 points related to the topic. One of the biggest mistakes that majority of the speakers make, they, in an endeavor or an effort to sound very informal, big mistake. In a presentation, you should never try to be informal. They wrap up the entire conclusion by saying, I guess that's about it. Now, you might have given a wonderful presentation. The moment you say, I guess that's about it, you spoil the entire thing. Reason being, if you are guessing about your content, why should people listen to you? No one has the time to pay attention to your guesses. So kindly remember this thing, that you have to be in complete control when you address people. So no guessing. Please, no guessing. Use signposts. Be very definite and very concrete with your points, so that people should pay attention to whatever you have to say. It's about the basic definition of an oral presentation, and then we shifted on to stages. We have talked about the first 2 stages. First one being the planning stage, and the second one being the preparation stage. Now we'll discuss the third stage, that is presentation stage. According to me, this is the most important stage, because majority of us mess it up when it comes to presentation part. There will be 2 basic components of this stage. One is the verbal component, and other is body language. In the verbal component, I'll not be talking about what you should say, because I believe that in the second stage, that is the preparation stage, you must have compiled decent enough matter. So I'll be telling you what you should not say in the verbal component when it comes to the presentation part. Many times when we speak, we have a set matter, but when we actually deliver that matter, we add certain things to it. And those certain things are the ones which create a lot of problem. If I have to sum it up in one line, I'll say that in any kind of presentation, please do not use racist or sexist language. What is racist language? Adverse comments against a particular race can be called racist use of language. Adverse comments against blacks, for instance, racist use of language. According to me, even the word black should be avoided. What are the implications of it for a country like India? In a country like India, we should avoid making adverse comments against religious groups. We live in a secular country. We need to be very tolerant. We might be having even rigid opinion about something. Even if that is the case, a rigid opinion about the other religious group, we are not supposed to air that opinion. I can give you an example. This example is from a novel written by Shashi Tharoor. It is the 3rd novel. Title is Riot. So in this novel, there is a Hindu fanatic, Hindu hardliner, who says, Muslims are evil people. Violence against non-Muslims is in their blood. They only understand language of force. So adverse comments against a particular religious group. So if a Hindu hardliner says that Muslims are evil people, it is wrong. But at the same time, if a Muslim hardliner says that Hindus are kafirs, kafir is a non-believer, again it is objectionable, it is wrong. Any kind of adverse comment against a particular religious group, majority or minority, has to be avoided. This is one of the most important things. The second important point, sexist use of language should not be there. What is sexist use of language? Sexist use of language simply means adverse comments against women, right? So any kind of statement which says that women are inferior should be avoided. We can end up offending a lot of feminists in the crowd, and trust me, it's a bad thing to offend feminists. So I'll give you 3 examples. The first one is a very simple statement. The second one is a section of a poem. And third one is an Old English saying. So let's start. Or I'll start, I should say. First example. Women can't compete with men. Sexist use of language. Don't use it, please. I hope you don't actually believe it. My advice, even if you do, please don't air it. Please don't say this thing from stage. It's bad, wrong. Next, I'll quote from a poem. The poem has been written by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So, here we go. Man for the field, woman for the hearth. Man for the sword, and for the needle, she. Man with the head, woman with the heart. Man to command, woman to obey. All else, confusion. My question to you, are these sexist lines? Question number 2, can we say that Alfred Lord Tennyson was sexist? I'll give you the answer now. When these lines were written, these lines were not sexist because many people were actually not talking about feminism. Movement had started for sure, but it was not as strong as it was in 20th century and 21st century. So Alfred Lord Tennyson was basically talking about the accepted roles. Are these lines sexist today? Yes, they are. Because of this angle or perspective of feminism today, when we analyze the lines today, they become sexist. Can we say that Alfred Lord Tennyson was sexist? Certainly not. He was not sexist because he was talking about the accepted norms. With the changing paradigms of knowledge, the way we approach lines, the way we approach text, they change. But we cannot dub a particular writer as sexist or non-sexist on the basis of revised knowledge. Third example, an old English saying. I'm sure many of you might not have listened to it. Not because you're not very well versed with English. The reason is pretty simple, that English is not our mother tongue. So the example goes like this. A dog, a wife, a walnut tree. The more you beat them, the better they be. It's an old English saying, sexist use of language, and the line proves just one thing about even English society, that for a very long time, women did not have equal rights like men in a pretty sophisticated, pretty open society of England. Coming back to oral presentation, any kind of sexist language should be avoided. Now I shift to the body language part. Of course, it's a very broad field. It possibly cannot be summed up in 2 or 3 heads, but still I'll try to make an effort. So I'll just be talking about it very briefly. Body language basically means how we communicate through the use of our body, how we sit, how we stand, how we look at people. So I'll just be talking about 2 or 3 things very quickly. First one is smile. While giving a presentation, should we smile? Answer is yes. If we smile, what happens? When we smile, what happens? We come across as a very friendly person. And the first thing that happens then is that we get good feedback from our audience. Why? Because we're able to establish a rapport with audience. The second thing that happens, the speaker comes across as a very confident person. So everyone likes a confident person. The third thing, the moment a speaker smiles, he relaxes his vocal cords. And with relaxed vocal cords, chances are that he'll be able to speak well. But the precaution, you should not smile indiscriminately. When you have to smile depends upon the content. Because if you're discussing something which is very serious, for instance, 500 people lost lives and one of the terrorist attacks, and therein you start smiling, it's the end of the presentation, trust me. You'll come across as a very sadistic person. People are not going to like you. The next important thing, eye contact. Should you maintain eye contact? Certainly yes. The moment you maintain eye contact, you come across as a very confident person. Again, you can establish good rapport with the people. And establishing of rapport is extremely important. Why? Because as I stated earlier on, you get good feedback from people. Just imagine the situation. A student sitting in the class, teacher enters into the class, does not look towards any student, looks at the front wall, speaks for one full hour, and then goes away? Will he get any kind of feedback? What kind of environment will there be in the class? Will he be in control? Certainly not. So eye contact becomes very important. Next up, standing posture. Now, many times we have this habit of putting our entire weight on one leg and stand, something that has to be avoided. Why? Because the speaker gives the message that he's very lethargic, very casual. You certainly don't want to come across as a lethargic person. Certainly you don't want to sound or look very casual. So you should stand with your weight distributed equally on both feet and then speak. The last thing that I'll be discussing today, many of us have this habit of standing with our shoulders bent forward, slouching shoulders. Should we do it? Again, the answer is in the negative. First couple of reasons I've already stated. So I'll just quickly talk about those. If I stand in front of people with my shoulders bent forward, I come across A, a very lethargic person, B, very casual person. I do not want to give this message to my audience. And C, then the third reason, most important reason, when I stand with my shoulders bent forward, my breathing becomes shallow. And with shallow breathing, I cannot speak well for a long time. So if I stand straight with my spine straight, I can take deep breath, and with those deep breaths, I will be able to speak well. I will be able to communicate well. So with these things, I wrap it up. I'm sure that you will be able to speak pretty well after listening to me. But the most important thing is that you have to practice. If you just listen to me and believe that you'll become wonderful presenters, it's not going to happen. Kindly keep on practicing. Stay home, stay safe.